All right, everybody. It looks like it's noon, so we're going to get started. As people filter in here, they'll just have to catch up with us. Today, we're talking about solar-powered everything, maybe. And that's a little bit of a catchy thing. I'll get into what I mean by that in a bit. So hopefully I've got you hooked with that idea. And joining me today is Laura Peterson, who is going to talk about her own home experiences with electrifying some of her energy needs at home. So I've got a little bit of intro here at the beginning, kind of a long intro actually, as to sort of a bigger picture of what this looks like. And then we'll dig into the specifics of what this looks like in an actual house. And Laura's going to be able to talk about her experience with a heat pump that she went all or majority of the winter with, at least these last few cold months. And we'll get those details from her as we go along. So thanks again. And we've got time for Q&A for both Laura and I at the end. So if you've got questions, either put them in the chat box, or it looks like to me like we've got about a dozen or so people on here that we can probably unmute the mics at that certain point in time and have a good conversation. I will say it's been great having you all on Zoom, but we are gonna be going back to in-person meetings. So stick tunes, we'll have more announcements on that. We might stick around and now have Zoom meetings every other month, because it's been really great to be able to gather some presenters and speakers from outside of town that couldn't maybe make a trip all the way here. But we're looking forward back to being in a room with you guys and seeing you in person. So at least every other month, these energy presentations from going forward, we think we're going to have in-person events. So excellent. Let's see. Oh, now I'm on my Zoom and I can't advance my slides. So, okay. So we called this solar heating today, and I think we wanted to catch your guys' eye with that. This might not be exactly what you're thinking about. We're not talking about what we see in this picture here, not your off-grid uncle's solar heating. We're talking about an all-electric heating system coupled with grid-tied solar power, right? So there's really, really huge drops in the installed cost of solar PV that are making this possible. You could spend easily $20,000–$30,000 on a home solar system in 5 years ago, and that would be just enough to power your lighting, your air conditioning, and any of your electric needs. But as we start to see solar approaching $2 a watt, even on the residential side of things in this area, it really starts to make sense about, well, that cost of power over 20 years is only about 7 cents a kilowatt hour, and maybe we need to start thinking about doing more with that. So water heating, space heating, or powering our vehicles as well. And additionally to that, huge technology gains in heat pumps have made this possible. It used to be that heat pumps really kind of bottomed out, maybe near freezing, maybe as low as 20 degrees. And but the cold climate specific heat pumps that are available these days and that Laura put in her house has a rated heat output down to -17, which is quite cold. So I'm going to start with a kind of a big overview, and just in terms of what is it that we're looking at here in terms of overall U.S. Greenhouse emissions. You can see the transportation is the big one, and electricity is coming in second, with industry being a huge proportion as well. Commercial and residential buildings, that's not counting the electricity they're using, but the actual fossil fuels or whatever burning they're doing, and then agriculture being a relatively small piece. Taking a look at this in another way is just this graph over time. Basically, mapping these same sectors, but looking at how they've changed over time in absolute terms. You can see that electricity used to be the United States' largest sector of greenhouse gas emissions, but it has come down a lot since its peak in, I don't know, 2005 or so. And that is just because mostly a lot of coal retirements that were replaced with natural gas and addition of a lot of wind energy. And we're going to continue to see the electric sector get cleaner and cleaner as more and more wind gets put on, as more and more coal plants are retired, and as utility scale solar comes onto the grid. You can see that transportation and industrial and residential have basically kind of stayed flat over that same period of time, with transportation creeping up a little bit. So if we're wanting to, get to a zero carbon economy, how can we do that? Easiest way that we have it with the technology that's available now, and not banking on some sort of new technology coming down the pike that is either in demonstration mode now or hasn't even been thought up of yet. We can do it now with the existing technology, and the 2 simple steps: cleaning up the electricity supply and then electrifying everything we can. And so we need to get started on both of those and start them simultaneously. And I will say that these steps are simple because I can say them very quickly. I didn't say that they were necessarily easy, but they are not as hard as you might think. And we're going to start by looking at that at home, because the good news is that homeowners, that's you all, have a greater power to implement these steps than you might realize. So we're not talking about electric vehicles today, but I am just going to put this out here that light duty passenger cars are almost 60% of the transportation sector's emissions. And so that's 17% of the overall US emissions. And so that is something that you, as a consumer, when you're looking at buying your next car, give a hard thought to a plug-in hybrid or a fully electric vehicle, because of course there are no direct emissions from those EVs. You're relying on the electric sector, which is getting cleaner and cleaner over time, and making that switch now is already a significant drop in the pollution per mile. Residential buildings are about half of that sort of residential and commercial sectors from this piece, about 6% of overall US emissions. And of course, I mentioned this before, the electric sector is rapidly cleaning up, and you can help by adding your own solar to your buildings and properties. So I love this graph. If you guys like more of these, you should check out Rewiring America. They just talk about this. This is from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And this talks about where's the actual energy going. So those previous slides showed kind of the end result of the carbon emissions per sector. But this is actually a more dynamic graph of showing, okay, on the very left-hand side here, we have all these energy inputs, both renewable and fossil fuel types. And then they get broken down into the individual sectors. And you can see, most of coal is going to electric generation, and that natural gas is split fairly evenly between heating buildings, using for industrial process, and getting used for electric generation. And so these are fun things to look at. If you're a nerd, you should check out rewiringamerica.org, because they made this graph, which is basically the same thing, even more complicated. And we won't go into deciphering these days, but it's great to know that the research is out there as far as where the energy is actually being used. Rewiring America also has sort of a proposed new graph of how things could look if everything was electrified and based on clean renewable energy. So, and I think from a sort of a quippy statement, just to understand, why we're talking about electrification, is that we can't efficiency our way to zero, right? So even with an 100% efficient fossil fuel furnace, we're still burning fossil fuels, and we'd still be making pollution that comes from that. So we have to stop burning fossil fuels. And this is easier to do at home than it is in many industries. I mean, many industries are relying on super high temperature steam. It's really hard to do that with electrification, but getting your house heated up to 70 degrees and maybe using air from your furnaces 120, 140, or using water, that's easy to do with electrification. So we can start this right here in Winneshiek County. We've got a great track record of getting things going on solar, and I'm hoping that we can be leaders in both electric vehicles and as well as home electrification. And I've said this before, but we have the present day available working technologies that are needed to make this happen. And we don't need to be waiting on the next miracle technology that's coming around the bend. So I will say this to you: if you're really serious about wanting to, make a big impact on your own personal footprint, so to speak, or your own carbon emissions, if you want to do what you can by starting at home, focus on some big changes and don't sweat the small stuff. So we can talk about heating and water heating. These can both be done in your home with electricity very efficiently and at a reasonable cost, especially when paired with solar. Thinking about your personal transportation and your personal appliances in your home, it is sort of a 4 big changes plus one. That plus one is the solar piece that eventually the electric grid is going to continue to clean up, and it's going to be making reductions in your pollution impact. But you can jumpstart that by installing solar yourself if you have a site that's applicable for it. Okay, so talked about those in big terms. Getting down to real life scenario. This is our case study. This is Laura's house here from the front. Laura, I'm going to give a brief overview, and will you just come in with any extra comments that you'd like to make on kind of your home as it existed? It's a 1950s home. It's about 1,300 square feet. It does have a full basement, and it was previously to this year heated with a gas furnace, forced hot air, and a central AC. The furnace and the air conditioner were about 30 years old, and they had done fairly comprehensive insulation and air sealing work. So the house's energy use was already fairly low to begin with. Laura, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, not too much. I mean, we were interested in electrification partly for all the reasons that Joel just outlined, and kind of looking at the big picture in the longer term here, and the need to stop burning fossil fuels more generally. And so we thought, why not start in our own basement? But the other piece why the timing was right for us was, even though they were both still working, the furnace and air conditioner, we, kind of knew that they were probably nearing the end of their life, and knew that we wouldn't be able to get sort of an emergency heat pump installation if we wanted to go with a new system. And so tried to get ahead of that a little bit before it became an emergency scenario.
That's a great point. I will try to remember to talk about avoiding emergency scenarios in this presentation, because it's an important aspect. So I'll show a picture here. This is actually what got us started. This is what brought me to Rolf and Laura's house in the first place, is that they were looking at solar. So this is their roof facing southwest, a little off of south. I can't remember exactly which direction it was facing. And so they wanted to look at solar, and I gave them a solar site assessment, which is a service that we offer at the Energy District. And I said to them, well, here's a picture of the old furnace. Incidentally, this is the same type of furnace that I have in the basement of my very own house. So I am thinking about furnace replacements as well. I don't have the air conditioner picture of the original to match, but what I said to them was, look, this is your current usage. Your electric usage is low for, a lot of homes, and maybe a 5 kW system would be able to put up for you, do enough for you. But based on the gas usage the home was using, that it's possible that, they could add this amount of electric usage to their by switching from to an electric heat pump from a gas water heater, and that from a fairly efficient air source heat pump could provide heating for these needs. And so it's possible that if you guys had room for 10 kW solar, that you could have heated and cooled and everything, all the power on site. Now, I think that the roof was a little bit small, and you really were only able to put it in about 5 kW to start things off. But this is still a good example of how things can work and how things can not work, right? I mean, as far as the house is going to go to moving towards an all-electric place, and then solar is providing a significant portion of that energy usage, with the grid providing the rest. So when I was talking with Laura, and I provided just a little bit of feedback and to her heating installers, just to give them some, this is a graph of, I think, 24 months of heating usage graphed against heating degree days. And so basically it's kind of fancy for just how cold it is outside. So we're graphing the gas usage versus the heating degree days. And you can see that the house makes a pretty significant pattern here. That line that fits the model is pretty good. And we use that data to help make some furnace sizing recommendations, with the idea that if it's in a heat pump, especially, if you buy a bigger unit, you're going to buy a more expensive unit. Now, furnaces are sort of kind of all the same price, no matter how big they are, until you get into the big commercial units. But that's not the case on the heat pumps. And the other thing is that you want heat pumps to be sized properly so that they can kind of run slow and low all the time and providing that nice even heat. And so proper sizing is a really important piece. And this is just a graph of their existing gas usage over time to show how that worked. So these are the new units. This is a much better photo than the cramped one I took of the old furnace. But there is now, the gas furnace is gone, and there is an air handler in the basement that has an air conditioner. And that air conditioner there's the outdoor unit there on the left. And so that air conditioner can basically run in reverse. And so it's working like a regular air conditioner all summer. And in the winter, it has a little reversing valve in it that switch, and it takes heat from the outdoor air and dumps that into the inside. And I know that seems kind of like magic, but that's the same thing that your fridge is doing. That's your fridge is taking heat from your 40-degree interior of their fridge or from the 0-degree freezer. It's taking heat from inside that box and it dumps it out into your room. You can feel the hot air coming out on the vent on the floor. So it seems magical, but it's not. It's just technology. Laura, tell us how it's been. Give me the details on how long you've had this installed and what your experience has been so far.
Okay, yeah, so we actually haven't had it installed all that long, so I don't have a ton of good data for you. It'd be good to come back in another year once we have more information. But we got it installed in the beginning of January, and then we had a little hiccup with the thermostat. And so really the full system, I mean, it was working, but the full system with all the thermostat controls we've really only had since right at the beginning of February. But overall, I can say that we have managed to heat our house. And that got us through some pretty cold days. I mean, we didn't have any kind of polar vortex situations this winter like we have recently. But as far as functioning, it's working great. What else can I say? I looked a little bit, kind of compared our electricity use last February and this February, and it went up roughly 2.5 times. But of course, so I mean, definitely we had some higher electric bills, which is to be expected, but we had much lower gas bills. We haven't yet gotten onto a gas or onto an electric hot water heater, although that's part of the grand scheme going forward. Yeah, it takes a little getting used to. It's now an outdoor unit, so it kind of sounds like an air conditioner running outside. A nice surprise as it got warmer over the month of February and now into March is that it runs much more quietly. It really is mostly the loudness that we were experiencing was on some pretty cold days, and because the pump can kind of adjust its output, it is a lot quieter now that it's a little bit warmer out. But the noise is also outside your window during the winter instead of down in your basement if you've got a gas furnace now. So it's just a little bit different there. I guess I'll leave it at that for now and maybe see what folks have questions on, or Joel, if there's anything you want me to talk about.
Yeah, this is a time for Q&A. So if anyone has questions on kind of this process from the overall piece, or talking with Laura about, her direct experience. I guess my question for you, Laura, is like, obviously you're thinking about this because this was a big project and you were kind of taking a first step. But do you think at least sometime through I guess this summer you won't think about it, right? It will be like it was. Are you going to think about it next winter, or is it just going to be, another, that box in that basement?
Yeah. Well, I hope we're thinking about it in the summer, and I hope we're noticing that it's a lot more efficient than our old air conditioner that we replaced. So that was hopefully kind of an upgrade for air conditioning for us. I think, one thing that we don't have yet is consumption monitoring. And that's something that we're working on getting in place that I think will help us know. So there's this, I don't know if Joel, you didn't talk about this yet, but in the indoor part of the unit, there's like a backup strip heat element, basically just some electric resistance heating coils. And we really don't know that there's nothing on the thermostat that tells you when that's engaging. You can maybe guess a little bit from your electric bill, But we would like to get some consumption monitoring, just so we have a little bit of an understanding of when that's kicking on and when it's not, and whether we would change our daily
Because your
heating
consumption
pattern.
monitoring right now is just your bill at the end of the month, right? And that's a little bit confused by your solar production as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I actually got on a line, and I didn't know this until last night, but they do have day by day consumption and production on our account that we can go look at. But really big fluctuations. I would say now going into February and March, when it's a little warmer, like a day of running our heat pump is similar to the amount of electricity that we would use during sort of high air conditioning days in the summer. So sort of moderate heating needs are maybe comparable to high air conditioning in terms of total electricity that you're going to be using. But we had some pretty big spikes, but we can't quite tell yet if that's because the strip heat was kicking on or what. So I think we'll probably still be kind of tweaking the system and figuring out how to best make it work for us even by next winter, I guess, to answer your actual question, Joel.
Okay, that's great. Jim, you've got your hand raised here. You want to unmute and just ask that? I've got later when you're done, I'm gonna talk about some questions that came through on the chat as well.
Sure, Joel. I'm leaving my camera off because I have very limited speed here. Sorry. So I know that heat pumps have gotten more efficient over time, or have improved in terms of being able to heat down to negative, 10 or so Fahrenheit. And I'm just wondering, Laura, whether you guys went with a system that would be regarded as, the leading edge of the technology, or if you pick something not quite that far down the list. I'm just curious about that. And of course, also interested in pricing.
Yeah, so the one that we got is an LG that we got through VIX. We did have a quote also for a Mitsubishi from Casper. And as far as I know, and I could be wrong about this, but those were the only two places that we were able to get a hold of in town that did any kind of heat pump installation. I didn't research the model a lot. And I don't, based on a few kind of operator things that I don't love about the specific model that we got. I don't know that it's the latest and greatest in terms of some of the programming. In terms of its efficiency at different temperatures, that was pretty comparable between the LG model that we went with and the Mitsubishi one that we also looked at. So I think that was one of your questions. And then cost, the installed cost was around 10,000. I think a little bit above that. There aren't any incentives. We actually delayed a little bit in the fall because for a little while it looked like maybe Build Back Better or one of those other things coming through Congress might have some sort of tax credit, but well, we're all still waiting to see what will come of that. I think there was a $300 incentive from Alliant, which we very quickly spent on our first electric bill, or spent back. So yeah, the cost, I don't know. I think considering we were also needed a new air conditioner, we didn't come out too far behind if we had gone with a gas furnace plus a brand new air conditioning system. But yeah, a little bit of a premium. And we kind of knew that we were early adopters and would maybe pay a little bit more because of that.
Yeah, Jim, I'll try to answer that question for you from just an even broader standpoint. I mean, I think one thing that's good for people to understand too is that you can get heat pumps on as part of a dual fuel system. And a lot of folks in the country have that option as well, where their heat pump might only work down to that 20 or 10 degrees, but they have a backup propane or a natural gas furnace that's providing that. If you are going to do away with a gas furnace altogether, you need to get one of these cold weather unit models, and you do pay a price premium for that. And I don't know if LG has Mitsubishi calls them their hyper heat units, which is just the brand name for their cold weather piece. And I don't know whether or not you talked with VIX about multiple LG models. Do they have different lines for you? You were clear that you wanted to look at a heat pump option.
Yeah, But I will say, when we started talking to contractors, their default was to sort of imagine what Joel was just describing, where you have maybe a smaller furnace, but they were sort of coming at it like, oh yeah, your heat pump will be great for the shoulder seasons, but you've got this gas powered furnace that would be your primary thing during the winter time. So it took a little while to get to this point of, no, we really want to figure out if we can go fully electric. And it really helped that we had Joel's analysis that, made it look like that we weren't completely crazy to think that we could meet our heating needs that way.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, like there are going to be homes and possibly mine, which is big and old and poorly insulated because it's brick on the outside and plaster on the inside, that I really don't know whether or not it's feasible yet to do an all electric heat pump option for it. I mean, well, anything is possible, but whether I want to pay the premium and to do that every month. When I think I've got some slides here on Payback, and so I will show you those so I don't talk too much off the cuff. But I know that people are wondering about that. But then one of the things was that the great thing was that, the upfront cost is, if you're looking at ripping out your existing working furnace and your working air conditioner, the payback is not going to be there. And you need to be thinking about these projects when you're looking at an aging furnace or an aging air conditioner, because you don't pay that much extra in the premium for a product like this if you're already looking at a new furnace and a new air conditioner. And quite frankly, a new furnace and a new air conditioner, the cost can vary pretty greatly depending on whether you're getting a less efficient single stage furnace versus a kind of a newer, fancier multi-stage furnace with all the bells and whistles. Ivan had a question here just about the water heater, and I'll just answer this quickly for you. The gas water heater is still there, right? So you're still hooked up to gas, and that's a project down the line.
Yep. Yeah, that'll be phase 3, I guess. The solar panels, then the heat pump, and then the water heater. And I see, Ivan, your question too, about the electric bill being 2.5 times higher. That was actually our actual consumption or usage was 2.5 times higher this February compared to last February. So before taking into account any solar offsets.
Yeah, well, your electric usage was, I mean, that was for the one individual month, right? From looking a year back, right?
Yeah.
So, your usage is gonna, well, I mean, just based on our estimates, even your annual usage is gonna probably double by adding heating to it, what your electric usage was already. So.
Yep. Yeah.
Dean had a question about, Dean, to clarify, I'm just going to read this out loud and you can jump in if I'm not answering this right, that I mentioned the heat pump running low and slow as a setback thermostat, still recommended for heat pumping and AC. Then, I would say that it's with a heat pump, you want to be less aggressive in your setbacks. Some people who might be familiar with geothermal know that you kind of want to have it set at a more constant temperature, and that provides a better thing. You can still do reasonable setbacks. Do you do a setback at night still?
We do. We do, and that's also a feature of our model, which we're not fond of, which is that the air handler is actually on all the time, not just when the unit is heating. So it's, it's just the fan is continually running. So we have ended up just programming it to go off completely at night, just because we don't really like the noise of the fan and we don't really want it running, all day, every day. But also, I mean, our house is pretty tight, so I don't know that our, it doesn't actually drop the temperature that much. But we have maybe like we heat to 64, 65 in the day, and it's rarely below 60 when we wake up. So maybe that much of a range.
Yeah. Well, 5 degrees, not that aggressive.
Yeah.
So if there's not any other additional questions, I'm just going to move on to just the payback here, little write-up that I did. And the answer is that it depends on gas prices. So I calculated this project initially that was just sort of a no loss improvement, that you were looking at staring down a relatively soon. It could have been a year, it could have been 3 years, but that furnace or the air conditioner was going to break at some point, and that it made sense to replace them both at the same time anyway. So the installed cost of this full winter, the standalone heat pump was just a little less than one of the quotes that you got for a new gas furnace with a heat pump providing heat on and cooling on the shoulder seasons. And so, and I'm a little bit glib here. My initial calculations showed that you were going to save tens of dollars per year on your new electric versus getting rid of the gas that you did. But darn it, my graph here again. So this is at my house. So this is what gas prices have been doing lately. I was calculating that cost for you at about 60 cents per therm. And this is the graph of the price that I've paid in my house since moving in September of 2020. And so the gas prices were super steady for probably the past 5 years and somewhere between 60 and 70 cents a therm. And it really was that polar vortex of 2021 that got things going up, that caused a crunch in the overall market prices. And in Iowa, I don't know if you guys get our newsletter, but we've done a couple of write-ups on this. But gas is a semi-deregulated utility. So Black Hills charges a fixed cost for the amount of fuel that they deliver to your house. But most of what you're paying on that bill is reflective of the market price of gas. And it's gone up, it's doubled over the past year. And I imagine that it's going to be high, although I would think that it's also going to come down a little bit from its peak recently. When I was doing energy audits 10 years ago, I was using 90 cents or $1 a therm for cost estimates. And so we might be back in that territory, or we might get back down to 60 cents. If I could predict what natural gas prices would be, I'd be in a different job. I made notes here. My new calculations based on $1.20 a therm, which again, I don't know if they're going to stay that way, but was that you're going to save 100 or 200 bucks a year on heating with this new system. And that was assuming market price for electricity, not counting any of your own solar usage. So, but you're still looking at a payback over a long period of time, and whether or not gas is going to be that high for that long it's hard to say. So any other questions coming through here? We're going to wrap up, and I'm going to leave you guys with some thoughts as you go. So last chance, questions for Laura or I. Okay. So I hope that this gave you an idea of kind of the big picture of why we should be thinking about electrification just as a way to clean up our own energy use. And that, you've got a little bit of comfort in knowing that someone here in Decorah that experiences the same winters as you have has made the leap and lived to tell about it. No frozen pipes or anything catastrophic like that. So think about the next big purchases that you will be making. And these are the same ones that I talked about at the beginning. So can your next water heater be an electric heat pump water heater? Can your next car or truck be an electric vehicle? Can you get an energy audit and see if your home is possible to be heated with an air source heat pump? If it's small, if it's well insulated, an air source heat pump might be a really great option. And if it's not small or well insulated, you might need an energy audit to help you identify where areas you can save to get that heating load down to make a heat pump heating even possible. And if you can, get solar, because that makes all these things go farther. Okay, great. Thanks everybody for coming today. Oh, Andy, do you want to speak out loud for us?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe quick touch bases, and you can continue this, Joel. But you started with talking about solar, heating your house with solar, and they've done solar and heat pumps. But there are issues potentially around the Solar Alliance solar tariff or any utilities tariff and how that works net metering wise. Joel, you want to just mention a little bit about a couple scenarios. One, for example, if someone already has solar and then they go heat pumping or EVing, their usage is going to go up. They might want to add more solar. How does that work with the inflow outflow tariff? Or if they don't have solar, but they want to build solar combined with considering all these new uses, can they size the array to that, and how would that work? you might just want to touch on that a little bit because it's not the simplest thing in the world, but.
Yeah, I mean, that's a long question. And you know
Come
that.
on, you can
But
do it.
The simple answer is that, whether you, Alliant is now with their most recent solar tariff, and I'll just call it kind of their net metering version 3. They've had 2 earlier versions of net metering, and this is, this is called their newest tariff. It's called their inflow outflow tariff. It's still sort of net metering where you're able to produce extra energy, either during the month and use it on your bill later that month or bank it towards previous months. They take a look at your current existing electric usage over the past 3 years and are going to set a cap of how much solar you're allowed to net meter based on that usage. And so it's actually, I don't know the answer to the question as to how willing Alliant will be to take a look at any new electric usage or new electric loads. I'm working with a couple customers through that process to try to figure that out.
Right. During, just a quick
help me out
addition.
here, Andy.
Oh, yes, it is. It's not crystal clear, but I will just add that during the development of this 3rd round of net metering tariff, the inflow outflow tariff, Alliant made it very clear at the utility board and during the testimonies that they would work with customers who are increasing their load to increase the net metering cap figures as necessary. So we don't know how that's going to work, but everyone should know that they said that, and you should have the opportunity to make some requests. If you're increasing your array because of increased usage, you should be able to make that case. So you're not just getting reimbursed sort of an avoided cost, 2 or 3 cents per kilowatt hour for that increase. And then the same goes really for if you're building solar new and Alliant says, well, we're going to use the past 3 years, but you also should be able to make the case, well, actually, no, I just bought an electric car, or I am just putting in this heat pump that's going to up my usage by 30% or whatever it may be. I need that worked into the calculations of the net metering size cap. So, there's just some advocacy possibly needed that should be possible to do some of that, but it's not a clear answer either way, like Joel said.
Well, since Andy's getting into the weeds, I'll just mention one more thing, that Alliant does have a time of use rate where they give you more expensive power during the day and cheaper power at night. That can pair very well with people who have solar and are making a portion of their needs, because solar is generally going to be produced in those on-peak times. And so it's another way to look at modifying your bill. And if you have some energy monitoring that you can do, that might be helpful. So I had one more question coming through here, and I don't remember what it was, but I'm going to read it one more time. Oh, Leslie had a great question just about what geothermal versus heat pumps. And I think the short answer to that is, I should have mentioned that before. When a geothermal is a heat pump, it's a water-based heat pump where you're taking energy from the ground instead of the air and bringing that into heat and cool your house. And geothermal is more efficient than heat pumps are by another third or half, again, more efficient. But the upfront cost is so high that a lot of times for a small, well-insulated house, it might not make practical sense in terms of the dollars invested. And so we're going to see a lot more, I think, of both geothermal and of air source heat pumps. For standalone buildings that are small and the heating use is generally pretty low, I think that a lot of times an air source heat pump is maybe going to make more sense. But for bigger homes that are needing to be retrofits, and for new, even commercial construction buildings, geothermal is going to be a really great option as well. And a lot of the same things that we said today about moving towards an electric heating system are only going to be possible with geothermal from a practical sense when you're looking at bigger buildings. So thanks for bringing that up, Leslie. It's a good comparison. They're very similar technologies. They're just a little bit different in the amount of upfront cost, and then the geothermal is more efficient, in the long run than the air source heat pumps are. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Oh, I've got one more. What about Jim Martin Schramm says, what about those that heat with boilers, or people who are heating with hot water with radiators? I tell you, Jim, it gets more complicated. There's a couple manufacturers out there that have some brand new products that do provide air source heat pumps that transfer heat from air outside to water inside. And I don't know, it seems new. I know one person who's got one over in Viroqua, and I guess I'm going to check in with him next summer to see how that worked out. So Andy is giving one more note here to saying that that it's very possible to consider ductless mini splits, which are heat pumps as well. Some people might be more familiar with the ductless mini split that just hang on the wall and look similar to the units that Laura has outside. Those are a great option to consider, and they're a great option to consider too for folks who have radiators systems. But the great thing about the ducted heat pump that Laura did is that she already had ductwork in her house, and it was simply a matter of changing out the furnace, the box in her basement, to this air source heat pump. So, okay, I think that's enough heat pumps for today. Laura left her email in the chat, or I said so that I could put you in touch with me. If you email me and have me questions, I will put you in touch with Laura if you want to be in touch with her directly, since she said that that was okay. So Laura, thank you again for joining us today. Any last words that you want to give out there to folks?
Yeah, I don't know. Brave new world, but I think that's the direction that we've probably all going to go eventually. So, and like I said, I'd be happy to talk more with you if you're actually contemplating one of these and want to know more about the ins and outs. There's a lot more technical details than what I talked about today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for letting us in on your story. It's one thing for me to talk about these in the abstract, but to have someone who's got them in their house is a great thing to put out for folks. Okay, last note, I will just say we're bringing back the solar fair this year. Look for us this spring. We'll have a little piece there, probably on heat pumps as well. If you want to come talk heat pumps at the solar fair, I'll be around. And then later this summer, coming towards September, we're going to be showing off electric vehicles for a number of weeks at the farmers market. Be in touch with us. Sign up for our newsletter if you're not, and keep an eye out for our newsletter for those announcements, as well as possibly an in-person meeting next month to be announced on location and time of day. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Laura.